Yes, in this video I am looking at Shiver, a TTRPG to do with horror and horror films. The art in this is superb. It's just got such a style to it. I'm going to have a quick look through the book and then I'm going to show you my interview with one of the creators. Very simple, very effective. I have played Call of Cthulhu, second most to Dungeons and Dragons. Chapter 1, Welcome to Shiver, playing the game. So in Shiver, each player creates their own character and teams up with other players to rally against the dark forces at work in the stories you choose to pursue. Best way to think of Shiver is like playing out one of your favourite horror movies. One player takes on the role of the director, who acts as the story's architect, or, the DM. So yeah, we've got DM, we've got the players. Core skills. 6 core skills, similar to, most other TTRPGs. So grit is basically strength, wit, dexterity, smarts, heart, luck, strange. They go off a little bit, but very colour-coded, iconic. So yeah, it's not D6s as such. They all have those symbols on at random. The skill die has all these core skills on each side. The talent die is 8-sided, but only has 2 different symbols, as shown here. When characters want to take an action, the director may ask them to make a skill check. If it's strength-based, the director would select grit as the core skill. The director determines a challenge rating based on the obstacle. For example, he decides it's a medium challenge. The challenge rating is 2, and I think that means you have to get 2 successful grit points by rolling the dice grit up. See how many core skill points your character has and add that to the number of skill die. Add that number of skill dice to the dice pool you roll to try and do the thing. Then there's a consequence if you don't. There are opposed skill checks. So here's healthy and here's the wounded characteristic. Lifeline. So you got 4 for weakened, 4 limping, 4 trauma, and then dead. Survivor mode. 16 health points used means they are wounded and rendered unconscious at death's door. You can stabilise a player, but their nightmare mode is less forgiving. You just go straight to death on 16 losses. They are an ex-player character. Weapons, armour, here we go, character sheet. Yes, and that's how many of each of those you have. Your lifeline, luck, abilities, armour, slots, weapons, flaws. The doom clock, yes. Now this is plotted like a film is, and it's like in the first quarter of the film, there's maybe a dead body or 2 found, and then in the second half there's another body, one of your compatriots may be found. If it's like a Halloweenish Friday the 13th kind of idea. Quarter 2, things are ramped up so that it's like the end game now, and then the final showdown into midnight and you're dead. It's just like a film quadrant. There are ways that the doom clock can be sped up by terrible decisions, or it seems like it can be slowed. It's up to the director. Advantage and luck obviously swings things your way. It's turn-based combat. Examples of the combat round. Ganging up on an enemy. Resistances. Crits. You can take your living characters onto the sequel, which I do like. I like all of it. The enemy has some tricks up its sleeve to keep it not so PC overpowered. Chapter 2, building a character section. Some characters based on horror tropes. There you go, the warrior. Some stats there. 3 different paths for the warrior. Warrior skill tree. Berserker, fighter, protector. You work up your way up the skill tree. The maverick. A completely different skill tree for the mavericks. Scholar. The socialite. The fool. Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. The weird. Someone who can see ghosts. The jack of all trades. Survivor. Multi-classes. A section on actually building the story. The film setting the scene. 3-act structure, just like films. Sections about expanding your world, making NPCs. Difficulty. Maps. Actual parts on the director's rule side of things. Weapon scaling. Some wonderful traps. Weapons of doom. Yes, the chainsaw. Flamethrower. Just a wealth of information So many, look at these cosmic horrors. Just so many ideas that you'll be set up for ages. Poltergeist. Well, I think it looks fantastic, and here is my interview with one of the creators. So here I am now to talk to Charlie, who is the lead writer creative. Is that right, Charlie?
Yes, that is.
And what's your job entail?
So my job entails for the core system and our kind of recent expansion books, Gothic. The vast majority of the writing, design. I also do some of the layout, all of the layout, I should say, and some bits of graphic design as well. To a bit of a odd catch-all of things, kind of juggling a few balls in the air with it.
So take me back to the beginning. Where did this whole project start from?
So I started role playing when I was in university. I discovered it a little bit later, and I kind of started with, I think a lot of people typically start with D&D 5e. And I started as a player, and then eventually kind of graduated. Everyone got scattered to the four winds, doing various different kind of bits of kind of work and things. So my background originally is in film and TV production, so that's what I was studying and went to go and do. So whilst I was working down in London, I was working at a post-production house at the time. I was doing some writing on the side, some prose writing, script writing, and I won a competition that gave me like a voucher, which I used to get a bunch of D&D books to start running with my friends and kind of use it as a way to keep in touch with people online, and kind of reignite my kind of love for role playing, because I really wanted to try my hand at being a DM. And whilst we were doing that, I noticed certain issues that my players were having. One, so all of my players were kind of screenwriters or people working in film. And generally what we wanted to do was play movies on the tabletop. And me being a massive horror nerd, I wanted to play horror movies on the tabletop, which they all kind of thoroughly enjoyed, even though I tried to spook them out every now and again. So kind of from there, I was kind of fighting against the system a little bit in terms of how to kind of make it horror filled. And then on the other side, some of my players who were dyslexic or dyspraxic or dysnumerate were really struggling with some of the more complex elements of the system. So I was kind of having a think, and I was quite kind of bored at work, and I was kind of basically just jotting ideas kind of down in the notebook, and kind of thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll like homebrew like a fun game that like simplifies the system, and we can run that and play that and give that a go. So I originally just made it as a way to play movies with my friends, but that's where my brother Barney entered the picture. So I basically took my notebook up north one Christmas. So we kind of from like the Derby, Nottinghamshire area, which is where I am now. I've moved back up kind of later. I was talking to him about it because he owns a friendly local gaming store, Seven City Collectibles.
Right.
And I was being like, oh yeah, I've been like getting into D&D, doing this, and I've kind of started fiddling around my own game and stuff. So like you can have a read of it if you like. And I handed him my notebook, and it was kind of family whizzing around, and he was sat there in an armchair reading through the book. And then he eventually kind of turned around to me and said like, right, when do you want to make it? And I said to him, I was like, what do you mean? I was like, this is just what I've been doing with my friends. He was like, I've not seen anything like this in my store, and I don't think I see anything like this on the market at the minute, and I think this could be really, really good. If you want to try and make it, I'll help you. We can try and make it, because I'd like to try my hand at making my own games, and not just be selling other people's. I was like, okay, let's give it a go. And then kind of a year or so kind of onwards, we launched a Kickstarter, and in that interim, I'd moved back up to Nottingham. I was working at a university. We launched Kickstarter, did really, really well. And now we've done funded two more expansions, and Gothic's just released. And I've been working on kind of Shiver and for Parable Games full time now for about half a year. And that kind of brings us up to now.
I mean, that's an incredible story. I mean, yeah, to have the idea, and I mean, I see a few Kickstarters. I've had the pleasure of looking through a few, but the design, the way it looks is so beautiful and professional.
Oh,
you know, it's sleek. I've not had the chance to play it yet, but yeah. So let's get into some mechanics, I suppose. The Doom clock. The timer.
Excellent. So the Doom clock, whenever you roll your dice in Shiver, so it's a dice pool system, so you roll multiple dice at any time. The better you are, the more dice you're rolling generally. If you fail and you roll a strange symbol, as the dice are symbolic, for every symbol that's presented, it ticks a minute up on the Doom clock. So the Doom clock is one part narrative mechanic, one part pacing mechanic, I would say, but also giving you a atmospheric element as well. Because what happens with the Doom clock, it's a 60-minute clock that you can track along the top of your screens, like director screen, which is our version of a GM, or on a interactable sheet that's part of the character sheet. And at 15-minute markers, horror movie events happen. So I use a classic slasher movie as an example, kind of mainly for this one. So say you're playing Friday the 13th with your friends and your group of camp counselors, you've just sent the kids home and you're wrapping up for the season. And at 1:15 Doom, somebody cuts the power. 1:30, somebody sabotages the school bus, so it can no longer be repaired and be used as your escape vehicle. 1:45, you hear a scream. Camp counselor Kenny is now just a streak of blood. He's been dragged off into the woods and he's dead. So you lose a key NPC who could have helped you out with problems in the future. And at midnight, you have something that is more permanent, more threatening. And in this case, it's your Jason Voorhees, your Michael Myers, your Freddy Krueger stalking out of the woods, becoming a permanent hunting threat for your players. So in terms of kind of what it's actually doing is that it allows you to kind of have those big horror movie moments, but also ties it into the agency of the players' roles. So it gives this sense of critical failure, which I felt was very, very important in horror. Of if basically you want your players biting their nails when they roll their dice, of their actions are potentially going to trigger a doom event and they have no idea what it is. So you get that wonderful stomach drop feeling when you're watching a horror movie, like your favorite character, and you see in the background the slasher rise up from the woods behind them. You want that, oh no, that stomach drop kind of with it. So it helps you build that atmosphere and maintain a horror atmosphere at your table, which I think is one of the more uniquely difficult things to do when running a tabletop RPG, is to make things feel scary and tense and maintain it. And the Doom Clock helps you do that.
That sounds very good. It does remind me of a game that I do play, Betrayal at House on the Hill, which has like you roll some dice which aren't necessarily numbers, and every so often you get so many of these counters that the twist in the story and the game changes. So that is the only other game I can think where dice rolls are give a time. But yeah, I like that. I really like that. And especially I was so obsessed kid with Elm Street that to play that. Which brings me to the only question about horror games. Obviously at Halloween, everyone's mind turns to Halloween and horror. But what about through the year? Did you not think, how am I going to make players play this in the middle of summer?
So I think it is a thing of like the broader kind of audience for horror, I think, tends to think about it more around Halloween. But I think that atmosphere is changing. There's a real ebb and flow with horror of a genre, and this is the film nerd in me kind of coming out more now. Of it's something that is a general observation with film studios like A24, as well as Blumhouse kind of pushing out more and more kind of larger budget horror movies. Horror movies are really starting to escape. They kind of went through in the kind of 70s and 80s. You went through the video nasty period kind of in the UK, where they were seen as like dangerous kind of movies and not good and kind of morally bankrupt and corrupt and all of that nonsense, basically. And then in the 90s, kind of early 2000s, there's a lot of horror movies from that period that I love, but that was something that was generally critically viewed as a very like trashy period of horror movies. And then you kind of had a bit of a dearth kind of in the kind of early 2000s, but then you had like little pockets and spikes where you had the you had Blair Witch in '99 and Paranormal Activity, of these low budget horrors suddenly spiking onto the scene. But then you had, and I'd say it would start with, it's a term I don't like, and I'll explain why, is the kind of birth of prestige horror, as people tend to call it, with the Babadook, which I think was around 2010, 2013, where it's kind of larger kind of heady themes and kind of a bit more kind of like emotionally involved, is the general thinking of like kind of prestige horror, basically putting horror on a pedestal. But ultimately, I just think that's people who figured out how to push horror, talk about it and market it in a way that people can kind of understand. So they lose that association with it being trash or it being dangerous. Horror is horror. There is no prestige in horror, in my view. It's something I feel quite passionately about of that. And I think it's that people are really, really starting to wake up to that, especially with creators like Jordan Peele and Jennifer Kent, who did the Babadook, kind of Asta and Eggers as well. I'm doing stuff with A24, of that horror is an extremely socially conscious genre. you can really turn a lens back on society like very, very heavily. And the thing is that I think a lot of people be like, oh yeah, horror is only just doing that now. But if you look back in the history of horror, it's always been doing it. It's just the societal perception of horror as a broad genre has shifted because of governments, because of production companies, and because of various kind of zeitgeist moments of things that are popular and things that aren't. So I think pop horror can always like be in more broad sense of that. Like, I think what I'm trying to say is that horror, I think, is nearly as popular as it has ever been right now. If you actually look at like cinema dockets for what's coming out, horror has suddenly exploded and it is crept out of the Halloween segment. I mean, you've just had Scream 6 be released, for example, and normally that would be put in a Halloween slot. Instead, it's being put as the premium March. So the patterns of kind of where horror is landing is changing, I think, and it is not just a like a holiday kind of like fun fair attraction anymore. I think it's escaping that, and I think we're kind of riding on that wave, but on the game side. Is that horror is for all season. I love me a Christmas horror personally. I love my Gremlins. So yeah, I think that's kind of it, is that it's a shifting state of where horror is popular now. But it is a challenge. Halloween is our busiest period. I will admit that, it always is. But I think definitely it's something we decided to do because we could see the writings on the wall that things were changing for it as a genre.
Yeah, I totally get you. I mean, one of my favourite horrors is Evil Dead, without a doubt. And so, you know, it doesn't matter how shoddy you can say some of the effects are, it's gold dust to me. And as a paranormal investigator in my spare time, obviously horror's on my mind quite a lot. But yeah, you're right. The dice pool then, they're not numbered, they're coded, aren't they, with images. So is that because you said your friends have struggled with number reading and stuff and adding up?
Yes, yeah. So that was part of it, and I think it's like trying to open up the hobby as well, in my view, for being more accessible. Of that numbers can scare people off, and it's not a kind of way of kind of like saying like kind of players are dumb or maybe they shouldn't be coming to horror hobby or anything like that. It's just when you load up a character sheet for D&D, for Call of Cthulhu, kind of any of your games that I would say like have legacy stuff that stretches back to the 80s or the early 90s, they are numerically heavy systems. And for a lot of people who want to dive in and really try stuff out quickly because time is getting increasingly precious, those systems are very intimidating. From the barrier to entry is large in terms of the amount of information that you need to learn, or the perceived barrier of entry, I would say, for some games that you kind of need to kind of enter. And one of the things that we want to do is try and take down that wall a little bit with kind of what we're doing with Shiver. So accessibility is a big thing. So by making the dice symbolic, and we also have a free online dice roller as well. So it's something we got asked early on. It's not a gimmick to sell dice. We do truly believe that the symbolic dice add a lot. Is that it has interesting effects as well, of that it's easier for people to pick up to play, but also when you're rolling the dice, the symbols evoke something and they mean something to you. So the way that the dice works, the corner core D6, is that every side has a different symbol that relates to a skill. So we have grit, wit, smart, heart, luck, and strange. Kind of our analogs for strength, dexterity, intelligent, wisdom, like smashed together, charisma, like for in terms of like your broader role playing terms. But they tend to kind of envelop other bits as well, from other areas too. So it's like when you see those symbols and you see those colors, when you see like a wave of grit, you know you've done something kind of very strong. If you see a wave of strange, you know the doom clock is probably going to shoot up and something bad is going to happen. You see a wave of green, you've been extremely lucky. Like you may not have succeeded in the way you wanted to, but you've managed to do it somehow, by pure chance. Kind of somebody's watching over you possibly. So it gives you these interesting ways to resolve roles, as well as kind of provide prompts and kind of move the story forward and always keep the story moving, because you never really get in Shiver the problem of somebody going, I've rolled a 12, what does a 12 mean? And that is the biggest thing that I wanted to avoid, is kind of people basically kind of rolling a 12, adding modifiers, taking stuff away, and then going, right, I have that number, what is that? Like it's because it's numbers don't evoke anything. They don't stir emotion, they don't stir story. In the sense, it's the only things you kind of getting, except if you've got a critical success or a critical failure. obviously in the system. Those are the only two I would say that really evoke that, but that's only by understanding what those numbers mean for association of what the system's putting forward. So yeah, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. It makes it simple, it makes it more accessible, and most importantly to me, it helps you tell a story.
I get that, yeah. I like that idea because they are colour coded as well as image coded. So as soon as you throw the dice, you can see, you'll learn to read them instantly off the colour, never mind the design. It's like, oh, I've done this. Like X-Wing's a bit like that. If you've ever played X-Wing, it's all about 4 shots, and it'll be like ticks or crosses as whether those shots hit your opposition.
Okay.
So yeah, I understand that. Now, it's all movie archetypes as your playable races, as it were. And I've got here that this create weapons rule, which customization is something that me and my son are particularly keen on. So is there anything you want to say about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So we were very big on that. Our core rule book had everything in that you needed to play. So there was no splitting across multiple books. You've got your player's guide, your director's guide, so our version of a games master, then a full toolkit of bestiary, weapons, items, and a starter adventure in the back. The other thing that we're really keen on is that we have our own OGL and SRD, and we really want people to make stuff for Shiver. We're really excited to see, by providing a toolkit, what horror stories are in people's brains. I want to see that. I want to know. I'm deeply curious about it. And one of the things to kind of remove that barrier is we open the kind of floodgates and showing you the design process of how we build monsters and how we build weapons. And there are entire sections before you actually get to the weapon section or the bestiary that talk you through step by step, like how do you build your monster, for example. And it's like, we talk about starting with motivations, like their locale, where are they from, like kind of features, how do you build abilities, how do you build attacks. And it's very much the same for weapons, like what kind of abilities are on offer. We explain range, damage. We give you a rough sense of damage scaling, so you can kind of get a sense of what it's like stabbing somebody with a knife compared to shooting them with a bazooka, to kind of give you an idea of kind of that squash and squeeze depending on what you're playing. Because I think that sometimes I felt when I've tried to be hacking stuff for other systems that I wish I had, of that the process of how that's designed, like as a template, is always quite obscured. Yeah. And basically what we've done, we wanted to do, and we feel we have done with the core book, is we've lifted that veil and been like, go wild. If you wanna, kind of make your own sawn off shotgun and strap a saw blade to it, go nuts. Like do what you want to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's got me really excited to get into it. Yeah, because is it one shot heavy? Is that the idea? One night of the clock.
So I'd say that the core system, you can play longer campaigns, definitely, but it is very one shot focused. It's kind of like replicating what we call that tight 90 kind of 90-minute kind of horror movie, where it's kind of full of frills and chills and people live, people die, and then it's all wrapped up kind of very neatly by the end, with maybe some room for a sequel. So you can carry characters over if they live, is what we tend to say. But then we have just released Gothic, which is a big 10-chapter story and our first kind of original setting, which is designed to be played sequentially and gives you like a bigger story. With that, we've introduced new mechanics like the Doom calendar, which shows you how to tie. I've split the story into 10 chapters. So there are 10 Doom clocks, and then the Doom calendar talks about how do you link those clocks together? What's the impact of them? Because the Doom calendar's whole thing is that if you're playing a continuous campaign or story in a unique setting, what the Doom calendar does, it focuses on how does that setting change around you due to your actions, due to your successes or your failures, and how much Doom you have accrued. So for Spire Home in Gothic, you see the city degrade as more vampires invade, like curfews are put in place, certain key locations burn down, your sanctuary where your players are safe suddenly gets raided and they have to go find somewhere new to kind of stay. So it can kind of trigger very important story elements that can really shift and change the tone of your game. So in terms of that, that's something we've kind of been addressing with expansion material of that, because the way I always describe it is that the core system is great if you're kind of wanting to play your kind of feature length movies, and you can still play your kind of longer form content as well. It all just depends on your players and how you want to kind of pace stuff out. But kind of through Gothic and other expansions, we're exploring on mimicking more like your monster of the week TV shows, or like your kind of like your big budget TV shows. So rather than playing something in one night, you've got 12 episodes to kind of chew through. So really it's very customizable on how you want to play. It's like, do you need that pickup game because your D&D players dropped out all of a sudden, and you just need to slide Shiver off the shelf and be like, right, we're running The Conjuring tonight. Let's make up some characters, 4 hours, see who lives, see who dies, and then return to your regular kind of longer campaign next week. Or do you want that to be your or do you want Shiver to be your campaign? Just be prepared to roll a couple more characters, because it can be quite deadly. Is the thing. So it's geared for both. But yeah, the core system is it has that kind of one shot quick fire element in mind. Because I'm a big advocate that all good stories end, and I think that's one of the things where fantasy RPGs, I think, fall afoul of this the most, of falling into what I call the eternal adventure, of being that they kind of get very long-winded. They get things start to spiral out, players do things, and then it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows, and then life hits, and not everyone can make it to the table, or something peters out, or something goes wrong, and the story hangs there in limbo, never finished, which hurts me, because I've been a part of many games where that has happened, and I desperately want to know how it ends. And I think that's what we're trying to do with Shiver, is encourage people to kind of, you can tell smaller stories, you can tell bigger stories, but please, 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 for the love of God, let them end, because everyone feels so much more satisfied when they do.
So where's Gothic at the moment? Is it out, or is it being created?
It is. So it's out on our store. So all of our UK backers for Kickstarter should have all of their stuff now. There's just a couple of PDFs, which will be very shortly on their way. I'm just doing the finishing little sprinkles of graphic magic dust on those. And I think America and mainland Europe and other territories, it's all on its way. Should be there very, very shortly. We're hoping kind of in the next month. And then, so it's available on our web store. So it can be bought in the UK. And then can be, once all of our Kickstarter stuff has been fulfilled in other territories, then we'll kind of release that embargo, and then all the pre-orders of that there for Gothic will go out, and then normal orders will go out. So yeah, so very, very soon. But it started coming with us to the UK conventions as well. So if anyone's on the convention circuit and wants to come say hello, you can potentially pick up a copy of Gothic there as well.
Excellent. And in the back of your mind, have you got extra expansions and ideas for future projects?
Oh yes, so we've had so Shiver Blockbuster and Shiver Slasher are double feature, funded successfully on GameFound. So we're currently working on that at the minute. So that's nearing kind of moving into layout now and getting the books ready. So hopefully they will be ready and out by the end of this year or early next year, is where they're targeted for release. So that's, if you're a big slasher head, it's got all rules for building your own slashers and telling multi-generational tales of kind of murder and mayhem. And then Blockbuster is if you want kind of high levels of peril, low amounts of gore, what I call like Spielbergian peril movies, so like your Jurassic Park, your Jaws, kind of Indiana Jones stories with a little bit of a slightly more horror twist to it. That's what our Blockbuster series is about. So really, really good as well. If you have younger players who you want to kind of get into the game, there's a lot of guidance there as well, and we'll be doing starter boxes with those. And we do have something slated for October, which I think you will be very interested in, but I'm not allowed to say what it is yet. Unfortunately, I can't wait until I can talk about it, because I'm very, very excited about it. But beyond that, we've just launched our Patreon back in January. So we're doing new monthly adventures and a case file, as well as other horror RPG content as well on our top tier. So we're kind of constantly kind of making new stuff now and kind of getting that out there, and have various bigger releases for Shiver planned far into the future. It's a system that it's very much our kind of core system that I think we really just want to keep supporting and going with, and making sure that it's kept alive, because we've already seen a really lovely, really engaged and friendly like player base build up around the game. And I really want to make sure that that is still kind of served. And, there's somebody out there who's waiting for us to do, kaiju horror movies, or, your 50s atomic monsters. I don't want to let them down. I want to make those books. Yeah.
Well, on the theme of monsters, I've got into this routine now of asking people I interview, if you had a blank slate right now and you've got to design a monster in the next 5 minutes, where does your personal mind go? What is your favourite? Well, do it now. Off the top of your head, what's your monster? You've got to design a monster. Where's your first starting point?
Ooh, so I know. So some of my favorite like horror monsters are kind of like a body horror style monsters. Anything that kind of invades and kind of takes over the human body, I find kind of deeply scary. My temptation is borrowing from films. So I've literally just watched a 50s film that was about crawling brains that latch on top of people's heads as a second brain and take them over. And I'm sure that's never been. That's you could definitely go down that route. But usually, that's where I would say it definitely comes from kind of experience of like kind of things that I have kind of seen or been doing recently. So I'm on. I think I've done this weekend. I'll be on my 5th convention back to back. So one of the things that I've been seeing is a lot of people kind of in costumes or mascot costumes. And I think there definitely is room for a haunted convention where there is a gaggle of kind of con goers or cosplayers where those costumes are empty and they're not filled with people. So I think that would be something I would like to explore a little bit to maybe deal with the constant march of cons that I'm on. Empty character suits of your favorite horror characters, but they behave very differently because ultimately it's just a costume. What's inside is the real danger.
That's cool. That's excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing future projects, and I will, spread the word any way I can. Thank you very much for being on, Charlie. Thank you.
Cheers. Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.